So I've come on board at the last minute, and I'm excited to be here. Just briefly about myself, and I'll let everybody else introduce themselves when they get up to speak. I live in the Boston area and have a blog called Meal Makeover Moms Kitchen. And I have a radio show called Cooking with the Moms. It's on iTunes. I think we're on our 280th show, which may just be this Oldways topic that we tackle in the coming weeks. And I've written a few cookbooks, so I love communicating with families on how to eat a healthy diet. So the issue today is how do we dispel food and nutrition myths? Everything from pasta makes you fat to eggs are bad for your heart to going gluten-free will give you more energy. There's no shortage of food and nutrition myths, and I'm certainly not even going to go there in terms of GMOs because the myths are tenfold in that arena. Myths are born out of nutrition confusion, which Dr. Katz talked about earlier, this ping pong effect. They're born out of fear, they're born out of emotion. And thanks to the changing media landscape, where mommy bloggers with very compelling stories like to share their stories with consumers, that they seem to sort of come to the top in terms of sort of cutting through the noise in the media landscape. So that's changing. It's not just traditional media anymore, so I'm sure we'll be digging into that a lot this afternoon. Food and nutrition myths are also nurtured by mistrust, especially with the food industry, so that's been another reason. So our job, working with the media, is to give consumers good science, good solutions, delicious solutions, but we also need to be very sensitive along the way when we come to, in terms of communicating nutrition to consumers and dispelling myths, because we can't just turn around and tell people, you're wrong, what's wrong with you? So we have to be very sensitive. And it is hard to compete with that mommy blogger who lost 100 pounds by going on a gluten-free diet. Those are really powerful stories. So as journalists, we need to personalize our approach to sharing nutrition information and busting myths. And that, again, is hopefully something we can talk about. We have to shout louder, and we have to learn how to tailor our communications to today's consumer. Myths spread quickly, dispelling them takes time. We have an hour, and we're going to do it. We're going to come up with some great solutions. So I'm going to toss it over to Sidney to introduce herself and to just chat for a few minutes about some of her solutions, and then we'll take it away down the line.
I like the idea of delicious solutions. My name is Sidney Fry. I am the nutrition editor with Cooking Like magazine. I'm also a registered dietitian. Some people find it funny that my last name is Fry, and I'm here to dispel certain myths about that. I actually run and edit and write the section called Nutrition Made Easy. So again, I think it's very fitting that, my role is to take the science and make it into something that our readers can understand and make it applicable and make it really taste good, because we're a food magazine, so everything I do is either visual or revolves around how to put it into your diet in some way. And I live in two worlds as a magazine writer, in that right now I'm writing for May of 2016, and I'm planning for the end of 2016, early 2017. So in that sense, I have time to sort of take the information and boil it down and really look into what it's trying to say, but at the same time, I'm also doing social media, which is right away. So it's kind of a balance between the two of learning how to take information quickly, but also having time to speak with the scientists and the writers. And we sort of got into this in the last discussion as far as solutions go. I was really excited when I saw the panel of scientists, because I figured it was a way that I could introduce myself, so that when I'm calling or emailing, you can put a face with my name, I can now put a face with your name, and that's, I think, setting a bridge, which we can talk about later, but creating some sort of panel that sort of is in the middleman of what's happening on the intellectual science level between what the people and the readers and the consumers are actually hearing and seeing. Anyways, I'm excited to be here.
Ellie?
Hi, I'm Ellie Krieger, and I'm a registered dietitian and also a chef, and I had a show on Food Network for many years, which I had had a show on Food Network for 7 years. Actually, Liz and I worked together at CNN for a little while. I was her intern.
She was a good intern.
A good intern.
Very good.
And I have a new show coming out on PBS this spring. I have 6 cookbooks, and I write 2 columns for the Washington Post. I've written for various outlets over the years. And I mean, I kind of want to just launch into it because I think we have the whole idea of busting myths. I'm really not sure if we can entirely we're swimming upstream in this. And there's a deluge of, I want to say that I feel like we're in a sort of very intellectual fast food environment with the media, that the people are constantly being fed junk food, intellectual junk food. And with this great tasty appeal, right? Just like analogously with the sort of foods that are, the processed foods that are pumped at us as well. And so we as journalists, as food writers, whatever you want to call it. I mean, if you want to debate that it's true journalism or whatever, I think that's just semantics. Basically, we're talking about food, we're writing about food and health. And so I just took note of that word that whether it's journalism or not, I'm not quite sure. But nonetheless, I think our job is to serve people healthy food that also is as compelling and can compete with all this junk, right? And so how do we do that? And I think that there's several different things that get in the way. But I think the main thing is that a lot of this junk food is sort of unburdened by science, right? So these people are out there saying stuff, literally making stuff up. And I'm not kidding because I hear it all the time. I feel like I wanted to start a Twitter account like Check Your Facts because literally it's just made up. I don't know where they could be possibly getting this. And this is what people are hearing on a regular basis. This is what people are gravitating to. But I think so that's the problem, okay? But we're talking about solutions here. And one of the things that we can do is I learned in my master's, which I did in nutrition education with a minor in journalism at Columbia. Isabel Contento, I don't know if you know her work. She's really wrote the book on behavior change in health. And she said 3 things need to happen to make someone change their behavior. Head, heart, and hands all need to be addressed. And I think we're very good as writers often, as scientists, as science people, talk about the head part. We're talking about the intellectual aspect. But it's the heart, and I'll talk about the hands in a minute, but I think the heart is missing. And if we can touch people in where they're motivated, what really moves them, what captivates them, what drives them to do something, if we can tap that, then we can kind of make our way toward a solution of getting real information to people that they can actually use, that they will actually use. And I think a lot of that is storytelling. I think we forget about this part that people, want an emotional connection. And I think that's why a lot of these mommy bloggers, whether they are giving good information or bad information, people are attracted to that story that they create. So I think we can do a much better job of creating a story that people can emotionally connect to. The other thing that really touches people emotionally is actual food, meals. And this is why I love what I do in terms of cooking. Because, okay, the news story might be, which isn't news, right? The old news, vegetables are good for you. Well, you know what? How many stories can come out of that if you focus on food? I can think of, 10 off the top of my head. There's hundreds, maybe thousands of vegetables out there. So what if we do stories all about making them wonderful, making them a way that you can use every day, that your kid's gonna flip over when they open their lunchbox? So suddenly you're tapping a nerve that focuses on taste. And I think this is we've definitely discussed taste here, but I think oftentimes nutrition is discussed in very plain terms, and taste doesn't really come up that much. Maybe it comes up 10% of the time if we're lucky, but that is the #1 driver of what makes people make a food choice. #1. And so we can touch people in their heart, get them motivated. I think that's going to really help us make our way toward busting some of these myths. If not busting them, at least giving people a sound reason to listen and cause to listen, cause to perk up their ears. The last quick point that I wanted to make for this heart, is the hands. So head, heart, and hands. And the hands is the doability of it, right? So it needs to be really accessible, doable. It's about meeting people where they are and giving them something they can really take home and do, which is another reason why I love recipes. Because literally, a recipe with a beautiful photograph, ideally, does all of that. So you're inspired by, whoa, that looks so good, I'm making that tonight. Wow, it has not that many ingredients, and I think I might even have most of those things. I'm gonna make it tonight. You make it, it immediately motivates you because you could do it, and it's delicious. And physically, you have that skill. You're giving someone the actual tool that they can physically do. And so building on that, I think, talking about it in terms of real food helps us give our message across in a way that really, really can help people, help us move past some of this junk food media.
Excellent. Okay, carry on.
I'm Madelyn Fernstrom. I'm the NBC News Health and Nutrition Editor, which means that I work on television, I write for our digital platforms, and do a lot of vetting for NBC News, for the Today Show, for MSNBC, and all of our cable shows. But before I start with my 5-minute intro, I have to tell you, my son has all of Ellie's cookbooks and is still raving about that white gazpacho. So, and to pick up on one theme, I'm going to summarize a couple of things, but one theme that I hear there's a general consensus, and we have to really blend our view of this, is that a recent giant survey looked at what do people choose when it comes to picking foods. Number 1 is taste. Number 2 is convenience. Number 3 is cost. And number 4 is nutrient value. Now, we're not talking about the highly educated person who's shopping at Whole Foods. We're talking about a general, very well done survey, good demographic of saying this is where we are. And so if we meet people where we are and everything that we're talking about, this is huge, because when you set the bar too high of what you want people to do, what people do nothing. And you look at this in any part of wellness, unless you're something that's not food related. All the regulations of walk 20 to 30 minutes a day. Walk moderately, that's good. Good for heart health, good for weight. Then recommendations and science moves on. It's 45 minutes. Then it's 60 minutes. And then it becomes 75 minutes. And people start to say, 75 minutes, I can't do that. 20 I could do. So instead of saying, I'll do what I can, the message is, I'll do nothing. Because in science, the message has been, here's the newest data, and here's what's ideal if you can do it. And it doesn't translate back to what people need to do. And I think part of the issue with all of this is translation. And I want to spend 1 minute talking about what has changed. I love coming to Boston because this is where I did my clinical and scientific training. In the days where you go, I can see patients, I'll do research, I'll publish my findings, everyone will listen, we'll do good for the world. Back on Earth, you can see, and many years later, this is really not happening, because when we look at how did science translate to the media before, many of the people in this room and many of the same journalists would call someone, you'd get some information, and the scientific finding was the story. And then it would be published somewhere in a journal that a lot of people heard of, or in the New York Times, or in honor of Walter, the Boston Globe, forget the Times. Or someplace, the Wall Street Journal, where you're going, okay, this is how we got information. Then the explosion of all the platforms, because it is broadcast, it's digital, and it's social media. And social media has become increasingly important, because what are the sources of information? It used to, as David said, it used to be us. It used to be scientists who would say, here's the finding. And now it's diluted. It can be, in no particular order, a celebrity, a mommy blogger, a regular blogger, a self-described, health expert, like the Food Babe, for example. And all of these examples came up. But now things have changed because the public doesn't have any discrimination. Someone, in this room, you go, well, everyone knows the New England Journal of Medicine, but do people know PLOS ONE? Do they know if BuzzFeed said, well, here was an article, and I kid you not, this was kale and thallium for anyone who was, interested in that area. Kale is now toxic, and I'm going to tell you about some solutions to writing debunkers, because something I think that is important in all this is science is self-correcting. Whether you do the study 100 times, 1 time, science is self-correcting, and so is journalism. And I think that in journalism, and I use this term seriously, someone who's writing an occasional article here and there or publishes a recipe, that's not a health journalist. But as scientists, we have to really associate ourselves and affiliate with the highest, most accurate information and fight against and debunk some of these things that don't happen. And this can be in all kinds of formats. But what has really changed is that the source of experts, celebrities or someone with a giant Twitter following becomes an expert. If Justin Bieber tweeted something about health, they don't care what Walter or David or anybody else says. It's something, this is fine. And many times celebrities will say, well, we don't really, it's not our responsibility. This is what I believe. But there's a lot of confusion in this area. When you look at publications, there's not a lot of discrimination. There's also not a lot of time, because time's of the essence when it comes to sort of what's new and different. But maybe we don't want that bar. And that's where I think science can also push back, and to say there are things we want to do and things that are important. So before I finish my little 2-minute summary of how I think we can have some solutions and 2 things that I have done that I would recommend to the group, for any scientist who is in this room who goes, I have something really good, it's embargoed or even pre-embargoed. If you send it to me at NBC News, Madelyn.Fernstrom at NBCUNI.com, and you can find me anywhere, I will make sure our medical unit looks at this and we look at things with a very practiced eye, because at least you have a reasonable shot of being in something good. And I think NBC, and other stations too, but I can't really comment on them, ABC and CNN, is setting a new bar for accuracy in news and vetting things and keeping a lot of things, as I mentioned before, off the air. Like, as you think it is bad, it is. You can't imagine what comes across the medical unit desk. So the kinds of things that I would like to try and help the scientists here, if you feel you are not being heard or don't have a PR office that you can really trust, please send it to me. And for the journalists, if you are looking for experts or other people, and some people said I can't get access to people, I don't know where they are, I can help you with that, because I think a meeting like this is a way to network, and people have to really stick together. The 2 last things I want to say is, well, how do you actually fight against this? As I mentioned, journalism is self-correcting, and you can correct things that have been out there by good information and having that publicized as well. Sort of that negative results can be a positive, because it forges the field forward. 2 things I want to talk about is, one is the thallium and kale story, which was everywhere. When saying here, the haters like to say, okay, now all the kale bashers see we're right. We hate kale, and here's why. A guy who was not even a scientist, who measured thallium in his kitchen and did some self-reports on people, published his study in Mother Jones. And every outlet picked it up. And no one said anything about this. Oh my God, kale is toxic. And the thallium levels are really high, and here's the problem. And so what I did is, instead of going back and forth, this is right, this is wrong, the issue is simply to write things and get it promoted to say, okay, here's a debunker and here's why. And here's the information to make people think. A better example, who's heard recently about the addictive properties of cheese? I mean, you'd be living under a rock if you didn't hear that. So this is something like every 15 years or so cycles back. But rather than telling people here, this is, cheese is addictive, it's not addictive, that's not really the point. To give information to the consumer, you have to say, well, why would you think this? And so the bottom line of anything I want to present in our solutions is that we have to provide our solutions in the context of what's happening. So it shows, as Ellie pointed out before, science moves on, it does change. Well, here's what we thought, and here's what we know about the topic, and here's what the finding is today, and keep it in context. And that is actually a way to get a lot of good stuff out, because people need to hear the same message over and over. So when it comes to the casomorphins in cheese, the little peptides that cheese has, well, it's very easy to think, and I had to write a debunker because it had been everywhere about cheese is addictive, and even the LA Times, hope there's nobody, there, or whoever it is, sorry, saying cheese, cheese is as addictive as cocaine or something like this. And you're looking at this, and the first line of that article was, well, in this viral story, like somehow that made it valid because it was viral. So these buzzwords come everywhere, and you're looking at this going, this really has to stop. And NBC News got a query because people were jokingly talking about it, but not in a snarky way or anything else. But people take this very seriously. And a lot of the cheese and dairy people, eat it or don't eat it, but just say, you know what, this is not a good source of information. So I wrote a debunker that said, you eat cheese for a lot of reasons, but your brain didn't make you do it. Cheese is good. It's really delicious. And here is the issue. Yes, these small compounds that come from cheese, when they're digested, these casomorphins, they do kind of look like opioid stimulants. But here's the problem. They never get to your brain. So you might think, oh, great, they look similar, but you have to eat it. It gets digested. It has to go through your bloodstream, go through the blood-brain barrier, affect your brain, and make this effect. Not happening because it never gets there because they're all broken down. So it's highly unlikely that this is the reason that's driving you to consume cheese. The bottom line that's happy is, look, this is under your control. And I think a lot of what we have to fight against is my brain made me do it, my body made me do it, it's out of my control, because we all have to eat. But I think in putting something like this casomorphins, here's why you might have thought this, and here's the real information. So people feel positive about something. Oh, my thinking is clarified, rather than you're a moron. Why would you believe that? And I think too much of this is right, this is wrong, whether it's talking about saturated fat or eggs or fruits or a baked potato or whatever it is, we have to meet people where they are and find out and project our information in a way where people will understand and connect to it in tiny little bits. One thing, whether it's broadcast or digital or even in social media. Maybe there's something to be said for Twitter. Can't say it in a short thing. Maybe that's a little bit of a problem. But short little bits of take-home information, not global. Joy mentioned something before, which I thought was really great. Is it making people think too much? I don't think so. Thinking a little bit. Where you're going, here are ways to eat. Vegetarian, Mediterranean, low fat, whatever you want to do, you have to make a choice. And I think as scientists and journalists, we have to make people think a little bit and go just scratch beneath the surface just a tiny bit to make things happen.
And and thank you so much, panel. And I will add one thing onto this as you were all talking, and that is, given the media landscape we're in today, blogosphere, instant communication, is there a way when we think of these solutions to personalize these stories so that if you're debunking a myth about cheese or debunking a myth about kale, what does the scientist eat? How do the top 10 scientists around the country eat kale? What's their favorite way to eat kale? What do they say about cheese? So that you're not just talking to an expert about why they're debunking a particular myth or a story or putting something in perspective, but how does it affect their life as the expert? And that's what consumers want to hear. That's getting back to the heart that Ellie talked about.
I don't think they want to hear it from, Walter or David or you or anybody else. They want to hear it from Gwyneth Paltrow. I mean, if we had the oomph of Goop, people are interested. What do 10 celebrities think about kale? People are more interested. You could have a kale and Aggie expert talking about this, and they go, God, this guy knows everything about kale. Should you be worried about this? Is there arsenic in apple juice? Everything else, and they're going, what did Gwyneth say? So I think
it's harder to get Gwyneth on the
it
phone
is,
than David.
But part of the issue is it sometimes good to get, this is a big debate that news has, that everyone has, celebrity spokespeople to talk about good eating. Now, here's one thing. Beyonce did an ad for Coke. Then I think she switched and did Diet Coke. I mean, honestly, you could hold up anything. She could have also held up water. Because both Coke and Pepsi have Aquafina and Dasani. So you're thinking, but the choice was not, it was soda. So at least it went from regular to diet, but never water. Is it useful to have advocates of healthy eating to help this cause? I would like to pose that to the audience.
I mean, I think that using the concept of marketing, because marketing works, right? We know that these concepts work to get people to do things and to eat a certain way. We can use those concepts in our reporting, in the way we address articles and so on, to get people to do things this way. So why not use that technique to do good?
And we're also, we live in a country where there's a lot of food illiteracy. We've been talking about that for the last 2 days. And to the point we heard on the panel about using recipes to communicate those great messages to consumers. Not only say, here's how you, can cook kale, but what do you do with it? How do you prep it? Everybody's so visual, whether it's an infographic or a little video on Periscope. But just using new media to really get those messages out, that news you can use so that you're clarifying the science, but giving them the how-tos as well.
When you talk about, this is a fundamental question. Probably 80% of Americans don't even know what kale is or what it looks like or what it tastes like or how to cook it. And this is, when people talk about cooking, simply prepared foods, is it more important that more people know about kale and the health benefits because it's got like a billion nutrients? Or is it good to eat romaine instead of iceberg lettuce, or eat frozen broccoli? Are the messages, okay, if you can't get, there's a lot of wastage with fresh vegetables, buy frozen vegetables? what is a message that is really useful? Like, you eat more fruits and vegetables. And I pose this to the group because maybe our demands, they're just too complex. What about, and what percentage of people want to cook more? Do they have time? They get this big bunch of kale. Maybe you could buy chopped frozen kale. That's as good too? Or maybe not. I'm not defending that either way. What do you think?
This is all about listening. This is about listening to our audience. So I think we come from this place where we can, or scientists come from this place where we can often get into a position where we're saying what people should do. We're telling people. We're in this sort of advisory position. But a key thing, my grandfather always said, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And I always follow through with that. Because really, we should be listening more. And taking the pulse of what is happening. So it depends who you're talking to when you're writing that article, and depends who that audience is when you're writing that piece, or where you're going to put that piece out. So it's really listening as much as you can for feedback. Maybe on social media, it's easy to get feedback. Finding out who your audience is for whatever journal you're writing for, and so on, or your TV. But I think that listening is really key. And also putting your finger on the pulse of what's really happening. So one of my things is I really think that every scientist here should pick up a copy of People magazine. Like, I think it should be like required reading to read this kind of popular literature and really read it and say, this is what people are being exposed to. They care what Kim Kardashian ate for breakfast. And so knowing about that, whether you think that's dumb or whatever, without judgment, just knowing that this is what's making the reading material, this is what people are being exposed to, what they care about, it's a way of listening. It's a way of taking the pulse of the nation. And I think that can make you more effective in your communication. And I want to...
No, go ahead, Ellie, and then we'll throw it to David.
Oh, no, one thing I really want to say that's a little bit off this point, but I really want to get back to talk about headlines for a minute, because I think that we've sort of abdicated. I think headlines are more powerful than we realize. And most people... So the whole story, eat butter, right? The Time magazine, that story was good journalism when you read the story. It really was very balanced, and the nugget was in there that, butter's probably neutral, but oils like olive oil are protective. It says that in the article. But the headlines eat butter, and yes, as a writer for newspapers, I know I don't pick the headline. I don't write the headline. There are headline writers. This is all being abdicated. And so the only way luckily, the Washington Post does a great job making, I think, ethical headlines. But I do think that we have to be very careful. And Joy said, you push the headline to get the response. And I know that you do that in a way that is, you're really threading a needle. And I think doing that well is critical, threading that needle so that you get the attention you need, but also are true to the science. But by abdicating it to public PR people, to producers, to editors, we are really abdicating responsibility. And I think we need to we don't have that much complete control over that, but we have more control than we probably think we do. And we need to take it back and step up and say no. And with my Food Network show, I literally, every script point, I was like, oh no, we're not saying that. And it was exhausting. And there wasn't a lot of time for that. And I wasn't a producer on the show in label. But I wrote essentially every single script because no one else can write that but me. And I think that what's happening is producers, editors, and headline makers are changing the way America's eating, and we're giving them that power, and we have to take it back. So
We need a hashtag, Ellie. David?
Well, thank you. First of all, on behalf of Walter, I resent the proposition that he lacks the pop culture appeal of Justin Bieber. You've just never heard him rap. I think we ought to give the man a chance. I'm discerning a potentially valuable missing piece of the puzzle. So I'm going to reflect on it and then ask you to react to it. And I agree with everything you said, and I think it's enormously helpful and illuminating. But it sort of begs the question, where did Gwyneth get her information? And I think there's an enormous potential opportunity here, because if the scientists are fractious, and if there's always a new fad diet, and Gwyneth goes on a fad diet and loses 11 pounds in 4 days, or then she becomes a convert to that approach, and everybody follows their particular hero. It's not as if Gwyneth has the time to invent a dietary pattern on her own. And there's always somebody higher up the food chain that proposed some provocative thing, caught her attention, she tried it, it worked, she loved it, and then she takes over the message because she has a much higher soapbox. So the potential contribution we're making here and in related efforts is to say, well, a global coalition of thought leaders have rallied around the fundamentals of healthy eating. They're not negotiable. There's a lot of latitude in that space, but you're either in that space, which is a good place to be, or you're in the badlands that are outside of that space, which is at odds with what a who's who thinks. And is there then some potential through that process? So it's a matter of cart and horse, right? I mean, could we potentially influence the universe in which Gwyneth goes shopping for her opinion and potentially rein her in? Our initial design, I think, is several notches up from Gwyneth, and it not disrespecting the massive pop culture influence she has, but she's getting her information somewhere. She's getting her inspiration from someone who's devoted their career to generating the dietary advice in the first place, right? And can't we potentially leverage that?
I mean, that is an important point. How do we leverage this to make it part of her conversation in a way that kind of works for her and her brand? That's not just things that she made up with. As Ellie said, is true. People make up things all the time. It just sounds good, or they read something on BuzzFeed, or they took the quiz, or something like that. But I think leveraging celebrity input is really huge, because that's who people listen to. If Daniel Craig said he went on a plant-based diet, and everybody goes to see the James Bond movie, they're going, oh man, he's pretty fit, he looks pretty good, he's got pretty muscle mass to me. These are the times we live in, and I think we will be up against a brick wall if we don't acknowledge that times have changed. We really have to say, how do we align with people who are getting listened to a lot? It's not diluting anything we're doing. It's a parallel track. It's to say, we're going to keep doing this and have good reports and good health journalism and good science. And how do we get other people to say it's not dull and boring? What has happened at NBC News certainly is that you can't say, oh, I'm not covering this, it's too stupid, or it doesn't seem right, or it's hearsay. You go, well, what's a way that I can cover this that gives a useful tidbit of information? And that's what's important. And I think science has to step up and say, well, this is ridiculous, who would cover this? Or to getting called for an interview going, I'm not talking to them, it's too ridiculous. To find a way to speak to people, to give them a nugget of information they can use, because you're a really valid source. Somebody was saying from the Pittsburgh Post Gazette before, how do you find people? There's tons of people who want to talk, and more people that if they go, someone would actually talk to me, I think would do it. And part of this coalition of going, yeah, people will have their cell phones, or you can text someone and saying, I need something quick, but that's a time commitment also that a lot of scientists aren't willing to make, or people feel they're lowering their standards by saying, I'm not talking to this venue or that venue, or somebody called me from Gwyneth Paltrow's blog. Why would I talk to them? Those people are idiots. We have to change our views, I believe, in saying, let me tell them something useful in a way that's appealing, that they might actually say, wow, this guy's pretty good.
We did invite BuzzFeed to come.
What'd they say? They didn't come?
We didn't hear from them.
Oh, well.
Someone had a question over here.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
This is a very fast-paced and fascinating panel, so I realize this question is going to probably sound pretty fuddy-duddy. But one of the things we've been talking about is the importance of a food system perspective. And the conversation in this panel and the previous panel has brought us back to a very focused conversation about diet and eating, and the kind of science we're referring to as only nutritional science. And so I'm wondering, is there a way in this world that you're operating in to bring in the broader food system perspective? And there I'm thinking, for example, in terms of science, in addition to the nutritional science, there's agroecology science, there's relevant climate science, there's land use and ecosystem services, there's stories about food chain workers and wages and social justice and the like. In politics, the Farm Bill, the Magnuson Act for fisheries, and then inspirational stories about the food movement and some of the things that are going on. Is there a place for that in this world that you're operating in that could be in addition to the diet and food piece?
I feel like that's what we are talking about. Thank you for that. I think a story about, I'm constantly referring to, best finds at the farmer's market, for example, and talking about seasonal, and then you can weave in those points. So it becomes a very practical thing that 10 things to ask your farmer, which is really driving someone in an actionable way to talk to the person who's growing food in their region. And so it opens that up in a way that's not saying even words like plant-based diet, moderation. I mean, those words are just like, I'm falling asleep saying them. So you can frame it in a way that's about this connection with your farmer and what are the 10 most important things to ask them, or 5 vegetables you never saw before, or things like this. So I'm always doing things like that. So I feel like that's very consistent with not inconsistent at all with the kinds of topics that you're talking about.
And also just what Chris was saying with his students and what kind of drives and motivates them to change the way they eat. We have to look at sort of the millennials and how they're moving up through the ranks and what inspires them. So you don't have to beat them over the head with nutrition messages, but you can talk about all those bigger, broader sustainability issues that will get them to the farmer's market and drive them to naturally eat a healthier diet. So I think the world's our oyster when it comes to shifting the conversation a little bit more to that sort
Something
of
to also,
sustainability
something to
piece.
be careful about is, when you segment the population, everyone is different. And these are wonderful topics. When I go, Politico loves these kinds of things, or Wired, or things where you have interested, educated people. When we start to think, as we go, it's gone from evidence to, story-based information. When it comes to general consumers, it's well, how does it affect me? What about me? So when you make this issue of sustainability or the plight of the farmers or locally, people are going, well, okay, the farmer's market, but well, how do I get there? And do I take the bus? And it becomes personal. So I think reframing these stories about why this is a good thing, not for other people, but getting it back to what people like, a personalized message. And I think sometimes we run a little far afield with different things because we're trying to cover too much. I love this idea. I think it's important, but there are also mechanisms that are maybe not network television, but different digital outputs or things where people are seeking this and providing this, as Ellie said, really in a message like plant-based. We don't talk like that. What can you get at a farmer's market? But when we try to give advice of not what to do, but how to do it, how easy is it for people to do things? Because most of America doesn't want to do much. They'll do a little bit. But if it takes more than they're willing to at least start with, if you can't get someone to take a baby step, they'll do nothing. And I think the bar is being set in so many ways so high. If we set easier, lower barriers, when the bar is lower, people can do something.
Joy?
So taking a step back for a minute and thinking about...
Turn the mic on, Joy. If it's off, turn it on.
Red.
Red's bad. No, it was live before when we were ready. Just tap it. Is the redness
I can talk loud.
Or you could scream loud. Yeah.
Bring the other mic over to her. You know what? I can talk loud.
How funny. That was working all day.
So trying to think about how we can squash some of this viral nonsense, it would be really cool to set up some sort of a network with all of us, because everybody's so busy, nobody has time to sort of do the research and figure out how we can debunk whether it's kale or whether it's bulletproof coffee or whatnot, so that we're all on the lookout for these malignancies, and then we have some place that we can go, and as soon as you see something, you can sort of put your rebuttal down, and then we could, go off on our different directions and try to get coverage for it, because at the end of the day, the networks and the publications, I know. So I've been told. They love controversy. So as much as they loved this viral nonsense, they probably would love a tit for tat and a debate. So I would love to set up some sort of a network.
And then to
watchdog
and
network.
to share each other's stuff too, to somehow
That's what I
network,
mean.
right?
Maybe
Right, like
this is a good
meaning you
start
do a
right
story,
here.
I tweet it out, I do something, you share it, just to build
But
to
to
build
build
on
a
the top.
conversation
Yeah.
between the media and this, I think this right here is a good start.
So-
And I'm just,
So it's like PolitiFact, but for nutrition information is what you're looking at. But I want to take exception. I'm going to put my consumer hat on because I'm first and foremost a consumer, and say, make one statement and then talk about the moonshot I discussed a little bit yesterday in context of both the scientists and the media, and take a shot at it. But right now, what we got to look at is there are $2.9 trillion being spent every year in the U.S. just on health care. That's not wellness, that is just health care. That includes the science behind the nutrition information we get. That includes the hospitals and the doctors, the long-term care facilities, the registered dietitians. It's $2.9 trillion. On the other hand, we have $2.5 trillion being spent every year by consumers who are spending their own money that is either making them closer to their health or taking them farther away from their health. Now, of course, the biggest two of that is how much we eat, the food that we buy, and whether or not we do activity. But that also includes smoking and alcohol and a lot of other things that are bad for us, including HBO and Cinemax and, PS3s, right? These are all things that we can make trade-offs with our own consumer dollars. So we actually have almost $6 trillion that we're looking at as the entire health economy that we need to all think about. And so scientists are in the $2.9 trillion economy, and we, as consumers, are in the $2.5 million economy. And so our moonshot, in my mind, is what we're all battling for is the hearts and the minds of consumers, and not just their hearts and their minds, but we need to influence their wallets. Because everything that I do in a day, from the minute I wake up to the minute I go to bed, influences how healthy I'm going to be for the next day and the next decade. And when we can start thinking about this problem from the eyes of a consumer who's not just making decisions about nutrition on every single day, but imagine one conference room over this exact conversation happening with orthopedic surgeons, physiologists, and physical therapists with the number of exercise programs that are out there, and whether we should be doing CrossFit or whether we should be doing, Pilates or yoga. So as a consumer, not only are we trying to absorb the tremendous amount of information about food, we're getting fed the same junk science and the same good science on exercise, and we're getting the same junk and the same facts on politics, religion, and just about everything else that we can think about. And so we want to simplify this to a point where we can say, are we battling the right battle here? Are we really, as a group, our goal is better health. No matter what side of the table we're sitting on, journalism or science or even consumers, our goal is actually to get better as people, and as consumers, that's our goal. Because nobody really wants to wake up in the morning and our first thought is, I want to feel like crap today. I just feel like I want to be that way. We're always looking to be our best. And when we look at journalism and we look at science, we're looking for that validation from you guys to say, hey, here's a great tip, busy person, for getting that right nutrition. Here's a recipe, like you're saying. When we meet people where they are, it's in those bits and bytes that Madelyn is talking about. How do we dissect this in a way that makes sense for everyone where they are?
Or, this whole thing is about debunking myths. Are we wasting our time debunking myths while we should be spending that time promoting something else?
No, I think science has to push back and journalism has to push back and be self-correcting like science is. Science may not be self-correcting in the minute, but it will be over time. And I think one salient feature of why we should really focus on eating, because it's one thing you have control over. A lot of times can't control a lot of things of your health. You can't control your finances sometimes, but you can control what you eat every day, and you're doing it multiple times a day. So I agree with you. I think the holistic concept is so important. But you're going, what's one thing that someone can do? Because they're too overwhelmed. So they're going, I can't worry about anything. I'm just going to run and eat fast food, and I don't care. But if you separate food that it is under your control, and it actually is eating, and we have 1 minute. I want to leave a thought. This is going to be a whole nother conference. The insidious problem that both science and journalism has of taking dietary supplements versus food. Don't eat a tomato, take a lycopene supplement. You don't need to take a calcium supplement. You don't need any source of dairy. Whether you eat dairy products or you have dark greens, it doesn't matter. Now there's garlic and onion pills. Forget about that. So we take the Mediterranean diet in a pill, and I'm getting quite concerned over both science's view of this along with journalism's coverage is that it makes it even easier. Why eat? You can just take a supplement. And because of the poor regulation and other things, I don't know what the group thinks about that, but that's something we should add to the active list of things that we need to debunk as well.
And then, do we have time for another question? And then maybe we could give everybody a few seconds just to wrap it up here.
Okay, just real quickly. When a celebrity says they eat something, that shouldn't be the story. The story should be for us then to take what they eat and give the science behind that. Or is it valid or not? For example, James Bond, vegan. Well, there's plenty of research showing, we know this. Vegans are healthy people, get plenty of protein, can build as much muscle, if not more muscle, than people who aren't vegan. So you can put that in perspective and teach some people something. Now, in terms of going to them for comment or that's worthless. But I interviewed Walt Willett once on heme iron causing diabetes, got his reaction to that. Heme iron is in beef and all of that, and that can cause type 2 diabetes. And whenever I talk to these guys, I like to ask them, what do you eat? Do you eat beef? And he says, well, I eat some chicken, I eat some fish, not a whole lot of it, that kind of thing. And that's interesting. I think people want to know what does a scientist, more so maybe someone who's really serious on the topic. A lady who did a lot of research on sugar, how often do you eat sugar? It's impossible not to eat sugar in America, to some degree. And she said, special events I do, and I eat a little bit, but I keep it this percentage. So I think we have to do it in that way to be educational and to use these media or Hollywood moments to then use that as a stepping out point to provide the science and the facts.
Right, use it as the hook then to spin off another story. Do we have time just for everybody to kind of quickly wrap it up with any final little nugget? Anything else you guys want to say up here?
I just think at the end of the day, there's myths about everything. If you look at all the myths, it's bacon, it's bread, it's eggs, it's gluten, it's fat, it's saturated fat, it's low fat. At the end of the day, you can't eat anything. And I guess my platform and what I do is just putting out the best food, the healthiest food, visually that I can. I can debunk myths all day, but when I layer it in with, okay, turn it around to the positive, and here's what you can do, here's a fact of how you can eat, that's how I do what I do, and that's the best way I know how.
Can I ask one question? I've been heard it, we all sniff at moderation. Is moderation dead? Do people know what moderation means? I think yes. It means like not excesses. And is portion control also dead? This kind of, gets together. We haven't talked much about this. Has everything changed so much that portion control is off the radar? Moderation is something that is a meaningless term. I don't know. That worked like 40 years ago, when portions were much smaller, and now, for a variety of reasons, they're huge. Is that dead? Should we move on from that?
I don't know if you really always have to talk about portions, but you have to show portions, and in today's landscape, it's all about the visuals, whether it's Instagram or a blog, or you're sharing something in a magazine. And if you're taking a photo, then you should obviously photograph the real portion. That's a great way to communicate that to the consumer. So at least they understand what they should be eating. You don't always have to spell it out. But I don't know, I haven't seen any research on whether that resonates with consumers or not in terms of using the word moderation or using the word portion or portion distortion. Somebody else?
We didn't carve it out in the consensus this morning, and Frank is available to comment. I don't recall a specific emphasis in the dietary guidelines. And of course, David Ludwig talked about the issue of calories, which by extension refers to portion. But I think the prevailing sentiment here is that there's an indelible link between the quality of our food choices and the quantity we wind up consuming. There are other factors as well. The diameter of the average dinner plate in the U.S. has gone up, 35% in the last couple of decades. There's Brian Wansing's work indicating that cues in the food environment influence quantity and so forth. But by and large, we really have a lot of evidence to suggest that the quality of food substantially influences hormonal response, the behavior in the hypothalamus, appetite. So I don't think we were silent on the topic of portion. while being silent on the topic of portion.
yeah.
I think the emphasis was eat higher quality foods that are good for health. By the way, one of the ways in which they're good for health is they'll help you achieve satiety on fewer calories.
Right,
They won't put
right.
your appetite center into overdrive, and normal portions then starts to become culturally normative as
Right.
they are in other parts of the world. Walter, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's the overall message, but I think it's true. The portion size has something to do with it, and the creep and sodas and things like that has been just astonishing. So I don't think we can ignore it, even though, as David said, it's the quality is
Right.
the diet is a strong
Right.
driver too, but they both have some role. One complication with portion size is that what's right for one person can be
Exactly.
very wrong for another
Right,
person.
right.
And for a healthy 25-year-old active male, that standard serving size at a restaurant may be 100
Right.
and be way too much for another person. So that takes some creativity in dealing with that. Our food service now, people do pay by the ounce for
Right.
entrees and things like that, as well as the salad. So we shouldn't totally ignore that. Thank you.
Do we have time for one more question? It's up to the bosses. We are 5 minutes over.
Your decision. It's just cutting into the time for the next.
We'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, panelists.
Yeah.